So I'm going to open a new image here. So this picture here, if you look at this picture, what do you think, where do you think your eye goes first in this picture? The butterfly. But where does it go after the butterfly? Where? Goes to the, it's all surrounded by lilac or purple flowers, but there's this big, huge pink flower on the edge. So your eye toggles between both of those. And you don't really want to take away from your center of interest. You want your center of interest to stand out, not something else over here. And that's what's happening, is your eye is going also over to this big pink area. So it's very easy to do what we call desaturate a specific area. There's a bunch of ways, but I'm going to show you today how to use the sponge tool, which is really cool. If you go down to where the dodging and burning tools are, remember if there's an arrow next to a tool, that means there's a drop-down menu. If you right-click on that, you get the secondary menu. The sponge tool is Photoshop uses really cool icons that fit. In this case it does, because you're going to soak up color with this. It turns into a brush. Remember how we talked about many tools in Photoshop have a brush? So now we want to take some of the color out of this specific area. How do I make my image bigger? Control plus. How do I move it? Space bar, and it turns into a hand, and I can move it over there. So now, one thing I noticed you guys were not doing yesterday is using your brush as a brush. You were just clicking the round circle in the middle of something, and you kept clicking. You want to stroke it just like a brush, just like it's a stick with some hair on the end of it, exactly like it's a brush. And up here you can change it to 100% or go less, but we'll keep it at 100%, and we're just going to go along, and we're just going to brush over those really bright pink areas. Okay, and you notice they're going to turn gray. What the sponge does is it desaturates things so it grays them out. If you keep going, it'll make it super gray. But now I'm going to go Control minus to go back, and you can see what a difference it made in that picture. Now your eye goes mainly here, and it doesn't toggle back and forth. If we go back to our original, you can see what a difference it made in getting rid of that really bright spot right there. Okay, so that's what the sponge tool does. It tries to get rid of specific little areas that are distracting. So in this picture we have both the chair and there's a big red thing in the chair. So even though this is really not a good picture, our eye goes to this spot because everything else is kind of grayed out. But our eye goes to either this red thing or the brown chair. So we can selectively take the color out of each of them. So I'm going to use Control plus to get closer to that again. Come over here. I already have the sponge tool selected. I can make it bigger by the bracket keys, right bracket keys, and I'm just going to come in and I'm just going to suck up that red color a bit. Okay? So now I can come back and it's not as bright. Okay? I can come and get more of it out, of course, and I can keep going until it's all just gray. Also, if you feel like the chair, and so it's a lot less distracting, there's no really bright red thing on the edge of the picture here. We can also take it to the chair back if we want to, because that's something else that has nothing else that's that color except the chair. I can come in, make my brush a little bigger, and I can come in and just kind of brush over it and take out some of that color. Okay? So that's kind of a neat thing. So that now my attention is more drawn to the statue than the background. I mean, and this was a bad example for a picture, but you see what the sponge does. So that's what the sponge tool does. The other picture here, we also want to talk to you about using vibrance and saturation. So if I come into my layers palette here and I go down here to the if I come over here to my layers palette and I come down to an adjustment layer, there's two of them right next to each other. One's called vibrance and the other is hue and saturation. We're going to do the hue and saturation first. What that does is it allows you to change the color balance of your picture. Now, you can really whack it out and you don't want to do that. So I'm going to show you it all whacked out. Okay? So I can make it look all wild and crazy, right? Most of the time you're not going to want to use this hue slider, or very rarely are you going to want to use this hue slider. Okay? Most of the time, there's saturation and there's also lightness. Now, the lightness will make the image darker or lighter, and the saturation will make the colors more intense or less intense. Just like when you buy a pair of blue jeans, they're very blue when you buy them, and as you wash them over a year later, they're going to be more faded. So it has less saturation, we call that. The more intense the color, the more saturated it is. We can always tell people new to Photoshop because they tend to oversaturate their pictures. So we come over and you do something like this to make it really, really almost like neon. And that doesn't look natural. You know, I judge a lot of photo contests in San Diego, and that's always how I can tell when someone's new to Photoshop, when they oversaturate or overcontrast a picture. So we want to do little tiny increments, maybe up to 5 or something, just to make it still look natural, but not to overdo it. So if I take that on and off, you can see that I added a little bit of color in there, but I didn't make it look fake. You don't want things to look fake or neon. So that's one way. Another way is if you come in here to the vibrance slider. The vibrance also has a saturation slider with it, so you can use both, but the vibrance is more intuitive and less overwhelming. And so you can change the colors and make them richer without it looking fake. So if you push the vibrance up, you can see that you can make the colors richer, but they don't look fake. They just intensify a little. Especially if you'll notice they intensify in the sort of softer areas of color. So they get them a little bit more vivid in those softer areas, and it looks a little bit more natural. Okay? Whereas the saturation will just kind of make it really intense. So if you want to just bump up the color a bit in your picture, use vibrance. If it's really kind of faded, then use saturation. To show you another example here, that somebody turned this in, and it was interesting because they took all the color out of it, which is really counterintuitive for the picture, because the picture is a peacock that is full of color, right? So if we come in and we go into a adjustment layer for hue and saturation, I can come here and I also think the color balance is a bit off on here. So I'm going to move this until it goes to where I think it looks a little bit more like a real peacock. Then I can intensify those colors quite a bit, right? So if I take that and turn that eye on and off, you can see the difference that made in that picture, right? Very dramatically different, because the person who turned it in took the color way down, way down. If we take, let's get rid of that layer and instead do a vibrance layer, you're going to see that vibrance is not going to do a lot with this one, because it doesn't have a lot of color anyway. So it's just kind of intensifying the colors that are there, whereas if I come up with the saturation, it's going to make it a lot richer. So you kind of play with which one you think it should be, but please watch overdoing especially the saturation on your pictures. But we can make it a lot better. Okay, so that's hue and saturation and vibrance and the sponge tool. The other tool I want to talk about is how to straighten a horizon in your picture. So in a picture like this, we have the horizon is not straight here, right? So there's 3 ways that we can fix that. One way is if we come down here and we right click and we see in here, this is where usually the eyedropper tool is, but if you right click and go down to the middle, there's a ruler tool. I don't think that's really well named, but that's called the ruler tool. The ruler tool has a ruler and it has an arrow on it. You use the point of the arrow to start at one end of where your horizon is, and you follow it along. You don't need to go all the way, you just need to find a straight line so Photoshop knows where that is, and then you can go up here and go straighten layer. Now, it's going to straighten that layer, but you'll see there's going to be some empty pixels all the way around here. That's because it was so crooked that in order to straighten it out, we're going to lose those areas. Anytime you see in Photoshop areas that have this pattern, this checkerboard pattern, means there's empty pixels there. There's nothing there. No information, no pixels, no nothing. Now we could fill these in by using our lasso tool and using the content aware fill. And we can fill in those areas, especially if sometimes we don't want to lose some of the information. Like here is really close to some interesting things, so we don't want to lose that. So if I come over and use the lasso tool, right-click in the middle and go to fill, I can fill that in. And you'll see that it can kind of do that all the way around. The other thing that you can do if we have areas like this around, how do I deselect an area? Control D, good. Is I can, instead of after I do the ruler tool, I can just come in with the cropping tool and I can move it past all those areas. But it's always going to lose part of your image, and sometimes that's okay and sometimes it's not okay. Sometimes it really makes a difference on your picture. So let's say if I do something like that and then I have that crop, the horizon is now straight. Okay? So that's a couple ways. I could also, let's just use a different picture for this. I could also just use the cropping tool. So I can come in here, and you can see this picture, the horizon is not straightened. It's very typical for people not to have a straight horizon when they shoot around here. It's a little bit off. So if I come in and I use the cropping tool, and instead of just letting it use the crop around the edge, I come and I draw inside here. Make it a little smaller, and then I take the cropping tool out to an outside edge, and you'll see that it turns into a curve with two arrows on it. That means you have the ability to move it. So you now see that I can move it, and now it shows a great grid to show me how I want to straighten that horizon out, and then I can just press enter, and it will have straightened it out. It was okay to lose a little bit of this picture because those edges didn't matter so much. But then it's a lot straighter. Okay? There's another way to straighten out a horizon in your picture, and that's if you go into the crop tool. You'll see there's a little thing up at the top here, the very top, that says straighten. This is probably the easiest way to do it. So if you double click on that, you now have a little tool that shows you like a grid and a crop mark at the same time. If you use that to come along, whoops, it's going to not do that, sorry. Did this last time too. If I come along that line, what this one does, and if you hit enter, it instinctually does it and crops it all at once. So this is probably the easiest way to do it, is to use the straighten when you have the crop tool selected. So that can straighten out your horizon. Either way you do it, you'll notice there's a grid, right? When you click on this, when you click on the cropping tool, you did notice that the rule of thirds little guide comes up, right? Which is kind of nice. So it's always a good guide for everything. So those are ways that you can crop your picture. Okay? Let's see. Oh, here's one more. Let's do one more. So this is done with a GoPro, so it kind of has a curved edge because GoPro is fisheye. So, but we can still get an approximation of that area. So we'll come back here and we'll do the straighten layer. We'll come in, kind of go along, at least get it fairly straighter than it is, and then hit enter. And now we have it much straighter than it was. It's still going to curve at the sides because it's taken with a GoPro, but at least now we have an idea of how to do that. Now, not every picture will need all three of these tools or types of tools, but they may. They may need them. You may need to take out a little color in one area. Yesterday someone had a corner in their picture that was yellow, and so we use that to get rid of it so it's not so obvious. And then straightening the horizon, that's very common. We have to do that pretty often. Enriching the colors is always nice, especially on a scene where you can do something like this. So if we do something here, if we go into vibrance and it also comes up with saturation on that one, we can come and make this picture a lot richer without taking away the integrity of it. If we do saturation, it's going to fake it out. We don't want to use saturation. We almost always want to use vibrance on pictures that already have a lot of color in them. Okay.